I want to give a big shout out to all my patrons, my Wildlings, Knights watching Kingsguard. My Kingsguard include Brendan, Sarah, Nick, Oscar, Stuart, Pat, Ikaika, Amanda, RJ, Shad, Nicoletta, Ezra, Jennifer, and Navi. Thank you all so much. You're the best.
The great are only great because we are on our knees. Let us rise up. Today on the Fantasy Network, we are going to be reviewing The Wisdom of Crowds by Joe Abercrombie, the conclusion to the Age of Madness trilogy in the First Law universe. This is the second trilogy that Joe has set out, and this is the 10th book in First Law. I've been waiting for this all year long. This is going to be non-spoiler and spoiler, so if you haven't read any Age of Madness, you might be able to get a little bit of what it's about before I dive into the spoilers for everyone who has read it. So it's a little bit for everybody. This is probably the most anticipated release. I think Shadow of the Gods and The Wisdom of Crowds were among the two that I looked forward to this year. Both have delivered. Wisdom of Crowds is excellent, in my humble opinion. Joe had a lot to live up to with this entry, and he had to wrap this up in a neat bow. And I remember ending book 2, The Trouble with Peace, and being like, how is this going to get wrapped up? Like, where do we go in the Age of Madness? And it turns out there's a lot of twists and turns to get to that finale, and I thought that the payoff was very much worth it. I think it's very on brand for Joe Abercrombie. And if you love First Law, you're going to get more of what you love and in the best way possible, in my opinion. I probably have a lot of people here checking this out because there is a non-spoiler section. So I want to give you an idea, if you haven't read the first two books, what Age of Madness is really about. This is 20 or 30 years, I believe, after the first trilogy of First Law, and then there were some standalones in between that kind of furthered the world. But Age of Madness itself is a world that is kind of coming into the Industrial Revolution, and it's also based, I feel, pretty closely to the French Revolution as well. Magic is going out of style, but profits, technology, and science are all at the forefront, and that's where you want to be if you're trying to make a dollar. And because that is where the dollars lie, or whatever the currency is, that is also where the power lies. And it is all about a power struggle between the people and the elitist, and then also those who work in shadows, which is my main man, Baez. So there's just a lot going on here, a lot of callbacks to the previous stuff that you definitely would want to read prior First Law books to this if you haven't read anything at all and you're just checking this out. But I can say without a doubt, I think Age of Madness is the best body of work in the First Law universe, and I think The Wisdom of Crowds is the best of the three, which then makes it the best book out of all 10. I really thought this delivered. I think that there's a lot of improvements from the first trilogy to this one, and I'm just going to kind of now go over, in a non-spoiler way at first, what I loved so much about Wisdom of Crowds. The first 50 pages of The Wisdom of Crowds felt like a climax. Within the first 3 chapters, we got a Little People chapter, which is essentially when Joe, and this is an excellent thing, and I've talked about this before, but I'll talk about it again here. He gives us a view through the little people, the people who have no names, that we're going to give names to, and that we're going to see what all of this decision-making and terrible things and maneuvering that the elitists have done. Joe takes a break from all these POVs and says, here are the little people, here are the modern-day people, and this is how it's affecting those in the streets, those like you and me, right? I think it's one of the most masterful things he does. I was actually going to maybe knock it for being, it happens twice in this novel. And I thought about it, but honestly, when I started the second Little People and I said, oh, he's doing it again, by the end of it, I was pumping my fist. I was sold. And he just does such an excellent job of each time he does this, of jumping POVs through this chapter of, different viewpoints from people that we've never met. He does such a good job of following them around, jumping the scene, while also the overarching scene being pushed forward that we've been waiting for so long with all the planning and maneuvering, like I said. Both of them were excellent here. I think it was the best use of this as well that we've seen Joe do in First Law, and it's to no real surprise that they ended up being some of my favorite chapters. And when people talk about First Law, they say, Lord Grimdark himself, Joe Abercrombie, and of course this is Grimdark, but I think specifically Wisdom of Crowds, for whatever reason, and I've been reading like a lot of Grimdark lately, I feel as if it is definitely the most grim entry. And maybe people would disagree with me, and I haven't read the other two in a year, but Wisdom of Crowds felt way more cruel than the other two, and really of any of the other books. I thought that this had some stuff that was just kind of like gut-wrenching a bit, and the humanity of it all was definitely on display here, and Joe does a wonderful job of inspecting that. At the top of this review, I talked about how innovation has kind of come to the forefront with science and technology and the Industrial Revolution, and it's pushing profits. But now we're at a point where society is breaking down. We're having the full-blown revolution, right? And now technology, because of people who are in power, is being pushed not for profits, but for brutality. And I think there's even a line in the book that's something along the lines like, if you're not using your technological advancements to find better ways of basically doing war or killing people, what are you even doing it for? Which is interesting. It shows how a different leadership, a different regime, for lack of a better term, can lead science and technology down a very dark path, depending on what the end result would be. And I like that Joe included that here. Joe Abercrombie is known to have some of the best characters in fantasy, and I would happen to agree with that. He's definitely in my top 3, and I love how distinct the voices are. And I really just thoroughly enjoyed, in this book specifically, Orso and Hildy's relationship that's been being built throughout the entire trilogy. It's like platonic, and there's really goofy moments where like I thought maybe we're turning this into a romance, but it never like quite gets there. And I don't know, in a genre where a lot of romance does happen, I love seeing like a male and female not necessarily having to be an item or be romantically involved to love one another and to be there for each other, and they're actually just like really great friends. And Orso Hildy was something that really stood out to me when I was reading this final entry. And on top of that, the entire cast of characters I thought was pretty well. I think Broad is the one that I would say is the weakest. I don't know anybody that says Gunnar Broad is their favorite character in the First Law trilogy, Age of Madness trilogy in First Law. But Gunnar Broad's fine. I thought he was put across the page better here in this third entry, whereas before I would never say that I was bored during his chapters, but I was waiting to get to the next POV. I did not necessarily feel that way here, and I think it's because he had limited page time. But overall, Gunnar Broad's probably my pick for the weakest if I had to pick one. But Vic surprised me here in this third entry, and I thought that Vic really came into her own. I thought she had a lot of questions posed to herself, and I think that she takes a very different path than most of the characters that we see within First Law. And when you read the book, I think you'll know what I mean if you've read all the First Law books and see how character arcs tend to go. And I really liked what we got from Vic here. I thought that she grew. I thought that she had big moments. And overall was the one I think that is most improved from the first 2 books into the third. Ricka seems to be extraordinarily popular among the fandom, and for good reason. I think Ricka is a great character, the long eye, the whole thing. Really the magic of the series comes to her POV, and also it's the North, and I love the Northmen. I love the name to men and women. It's so phenomenal. Ricka, in the first half of this book, I was actually not a fan of, and it's because Joe was setting some stuff up. And I was pretty keen on that. Like I was pretty in step with that, we'll say. I had a feeling of where it was going, and I kind of saw what the end game would be with Ricka. And I liked where it ended up. And I'm trying not to give anything away here. But I liked where it ended up. I saw it coming, which is fine. But it just made her chapters in the first half of the book be a little less enjoyable for me because I had no idea what was going to go on with, Savine and Leo and Orso and all these other people. Whereas I felt like I had a pretty good clue where Joe was leading us with Ricka. So that's not necessarily a knock on her character, but I would say, again, that I would put her in the bottom half, at least for the first half of the book. I loved the ending. The ending was tremendous with her. So I just wanted to cover that because Ricka gets a lot of love, and for a lot of good reasons. I mean, she's Dogman's daughter. You can't hate that, right? And I think Joe Abercrombie might be the best at taking non-POV characters and putting them in important situations to where, like, you could almost swear that they were a POV after you read the book, and you have to really think about it, like, oh yeah, we never got in that person's head, but it gives them such a voice. It makes them make such tough decisions that they stick with you just as much as the POVs. I'm thinking of people like Hildy, like Zuri, and Judge. I really liked all of the supporting cast here, and I think they stepped up majorly here in the final entry. The ending of this book took a ton of twists and turns. Like the last 80 pages were just straight fire. They were so good. I was on the edge of my seat wanting to know what happens without it being like overly action-packed, to be honest with you. Even just conversations that people were going to have or decisions that they were going to make. I was just waiting and waiting and waiting to get to that, and it delivered, and I thought it was just great. Depressing, but great. I am beyond happy. I loved this last entry. It made the trilogy feel so much worth it. I love it as a total package as well because he wrote all 3 books at the same time, and I can't wait. It's not going to be anytime soon, but one day I will sit down and I will just binge Age of Madness as one big book because that's kind of how it felt. Book 2 had such a good ending, and I didn't think it had much of a Book 2 syndrome, to be honest with you. And Book 3 also felt like just out of the gate, it was just heavy hitting. And a little bit of downtime in the middle to kind of prep us for the end, but I was impressed how it came out of the gate swinging and ended with just major moments. I even got like emotional towards the end for characters that I necessarily didn't think that I had an attachment to. One was even a side character that I barely remembered. And there's just a lot of moments in here that kind of caught me off guard, and it shows me how invested I actually was in this cast and in this story. Which was a pleasant surprise, because sometimes in First Law, I like to just watch what happens, and you're like, these people are terrible, I'm entertained, this is great. But he took it one step further with me, and definitely at least one character watch talk about in the spoilers that definitely got me right in the feels. So Joe Abercrombie, well done, amazing job. He'll probably never watch this, but I loved Wisdom of Crowds, and if you have not checked out First Law, I highly suggest that you do. I am a huge fan. Joe Abercrombie is without a doubt probably in my top. He's without a doubt in my top 5 favorite authors, and on any given day could be in my top 3. So that is how I view him and what level I put him at in the genre. So yes, I absolutely love Wisdom of Crowds. Now I'm going to talk some spoilers, so if you were here for the non-spoiler section, that is about to end. If you like the video, hit like and subscribe and all that good stuff. But now it's time to talk some spoilers, so get out of here. Okay, first thing I need to talk about in spoilers, because I feel like everyone I know that enjoys Joe Abercrombie's humor has talked to me about this, whether I messaged them or they messaged me, like multiple people. Clover's scene with Hardbread, whenever he's questioning Calder's men, and Hardbread just keeps axing in the back of the head. Sounded a little few to me, sir. It just sounded a little feudy. It's just so ridiculous. And like every time he's getting a little further in the questioning, and Axe, hits him, splits his head in half. Like, would you stop killing these people? I don't know. That was the funniest moment in the new trilogy for me. It might have been the funniest moment in all First Law for me. Like, I laughed so hard, and every time someone messaged me and said, did you read that part? How did you find it? I'd laugh all over again. So hats off to Joe. I don't laugh this much with any other author. Joe Abercrombie is, obviously one of my favorites, but he's also the funniest author that I read. Him and Pratchett go pretty close together for me, and it just feels like Joe Abercrombie is just a grimmer Pratchett in some ways. I said Hardbread, but I actually think it was Downside that was doing the axing. I can't remember off the top of my head, and I didn't have it written down in my notes, but as I'm sitting here thinking about it, I think it was actually Downside, so sorry about that. And let's just talk about a lot of the big deaths. I mean, Black Calder has finally died. Stour Nightfall is gone. I really expected Stour Nightfall to have another resurgence back to the top, maybe where he turns on his dad or something. That was one of the predictions I had, and then I had 2 others that ended up coming true, which I'll talk about in just a second. But this is the one I got wrong. I really didn't think Stour Nightfall was actually going to go all the way down. I thought maybe he would be like a Glocta of the North with his legs slit or something. I wasn't sure, but he finally got stabbed, and I loved it. I was happy to see him die. I know that sounds really odd. That sounds weird saying it, but it's true. I was pumped, and all hail Black Ricka. I loved her coming up moment here. I said it earlier in the review in the non-spoiler section. I definitely saw where this was going. Like, I didn't truly believe that her and the Nail were having all these issues. I knew it's somewhat of a setup, but man, the payoff was still there, and sometimes predictable is fine with me as long as the delivery's there, and it definitely was, and I thought that battle scene was awesome. And Calder's End felt so good and so fitting and very rewarding for anyone who's read all 10 books, because there's like little callbacks in the dialogue with Shivers. They mentioned the Bloody Nine. It's just like an ode. I felt like Joe really took a moment to say, this is a big guy, a big moment in all the series for him to die. And it just felt fitting, and I was almost like a little sad to see Calder gone, because I thought he was one of the wittiest and craftiest characters that we had. And those will be some big boots to fill. This book had me more emotionally responding to things than some of the other entries have. I've had a couple moments like that prior, but this book really got me, and I was visibly angry when Leo turned on Orso again. I'm like, dude, screw this guy. I hate Leo so freaking much. Oh my god. And like, Orso is like a lovable idiot in a lot of ways, but Orso is also like one of the only good ones left, and for all of his shortfalls, he admits them. Like, if anything, he should have had a little bit more self-confidence, and he was just brave like all the way until the end. But man, whenever Leo double-crossed him again, I was like, I can't believe I didn't see this coming. But before I talk about Orso's end, I have to mention one of my favorite characters, maybe a top 3 character if I'm like putting away the fact of like impact on plot and stuff, is Gorst, man. And it shows how Abercrombie is willing to mix humor and grimness, right? Like whenever when Gorso pops from behind the crates, it's like, hey, bitch. Like, it's just so ridiculous. And I laughed, and he asked, like, how's your leg to Leo? Like, I don't know. And Leo sees him smile before he goes down. But, like, I was very upset when Gorst died because I've enjoyed his chapters so much. I thought he was the MVP of the heroes. I just loved his internal monologue in his head. It was so good. And to see him go down made me very, very sad. And I didn't realize just how attached to him I've been. I'm never going to hear that high squeaking voice in my head again, and that bums me out. So rest in peace, Gorst, and also rest in peace, General Forrest. I think it was General, not Corporal. I can't remember. But Forrest, when he died, when Leo stabbed him in the chest, I actually like had kind of a response to that too. And I think Forrest isn't even a major character that I even care about, but I was just like, it was so brutal. And then I knew what was coming next, right? He was going to screw over Orso, and Orso being hung was where I was most shocked and the most taken back. I actually got a little bit teary-eyed because I've been saying it since book 1. I think Orso's my favorite character. He could be my favorite character in the entire First Law universe. I wish we would have had more of him in more books. So that makes it a little bit hard to compete against people like Glocka, who's been around. But man, Orso is so good and such a change of pace from everybody else, like where he's like really acknowledging the shortcomings of society and trying to work within the system. And like he knew his death at the end was even going to have progress, right? Like he's like, oh, well, they'll remember me for a terrible king, but the changes that will come after this could be worth it. So overall, maybe I didn't do too bad. And, you know, I had 2 predictions. So I had 2 predictions going into this final book that were correct. I told you about the one earlier that I got wrong with Stour. But the 2 I got correct were Zuri being an eater. I felt like that was pretty obvious after the second book. And I also thought Orso would hang because he was constantly talking about how much he hated hangings, and we all know Joe Abercrombie loves to put characters through what they say they hate. So I had a feeling he'd be hung. I was hoping he would get bailed out. That didn't happen, and it was heartbreaking, to be honest. I really, really enjoyed Orso, and I'm just so like, you know, he faced his end, like I said, like with no problems. Like he faced it so brave. His monologue at the end where he's going on and he makes eye contact with Savine is excellent. It was excellent, and it makes me sad I'll never see him again. So rip my boy Orso. I thought his whole arc was phenomenal, and I can't wait to read it again someday. But I am sad. And hey, how about Savine? Savine, I think she was doing some things out of the good of her heart. I thought it was a little bit of a weird turn for her, considering that she went through, you know, all that crazy stuff in book 2 and was just like, I just never want to experience that again. I don't care if those people do, but I never want to. I thought it was interesting, her turn to charity to save herself. She was like, I don't need to be a businesswoman. I need to be charity because I need to be popular, essentially. Not among the inventors and the investors, but among the people to survive that rebellion. I thought it was nice, thought it was good. Her giving birth to twins is interesting. I wonder where that's going to lead up. And then you got to put it up to my boy Baez. You know, Yoru Sulfur dies. Baez is in a tough spot. He's in a tough spot going forward, and this is where we could probably get more First Law stories. It's interesting. It sounds like Bethed's line is not done. It sounds like Calder had another kid, doesn't it? And Hildy keeping her promise to Orso that she would avenge him by showing up at that library at the end with Baez. I like where this is going. And isn't it weird that I felt like this during the book, especially when after Orso got turned on, I said, I hope Baez comes in and just levels the whole town. But the thing about Baez is that he's a wizard, he's a magus, but he's also a politician. And he can't just go out and just come in and start nuking people and take back over. He doesn't want that. And also, he's probably a little hard up on cash right now, considering all the banking has been turned over. I thought it was funny that they tore down a bank and are going to replace it with another bank. I was like, yeah, it sounds about right. But overall, I love this book so much. Perfect score for me. My favorite First Law book to date. I will be rereading First Law probably next year or the year after, so I'll probably have a more updated opinion on that once the other books are more fresh in my head because I'll binge through them. But this is an excellent ending. I loved it. I need more. I like that the door was left open, and I do think Joe will be back in this world. Let me know what you thought of it. Who is your favorite character from the Wisdom of Crowns and the overall trilogy? Mine was Orso for sure. and rip to my boy. So thank you so much for checking this out. If you want to support me on Patreon, that is down in the description. I have a Discord that's Patreon only, and then for certain tiers you actually can affect my TBR, which is kind of fun. But that's optional. I just appreciate you being here watching this, and if you're a First Law fan, I'm happy to have you here, and I hope to have maybe a discussion about Age of Madness as a whole with some people here on the channel, but we'll see when that happens. I've been extraordinarily busy, so we'll see when I can fit that in. But thank you so much for spending your time with me today. I hope you're good. I hope you're safe. Until next time, remember to always keep turning the page.